The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question for the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is now in session, and wow. I'm speechless. I never imagined on this channel that I would be covering this conflict, ever. Well, at least for maybe not another year or so. I knew eventually I was going to have to tackle this one at some point, but I didn't think it would come so soon. But here we are, and we got a lot to talk about. So, for those of you who are brand new to this thing, the Syrian Civil War started in 2011. It's a 2010s conflict. It literally happened during the peak of the Obama era. So what happened was there were some protests against the government, and allegedly the government fired upon its own people for rising up against them or something like that. And then I guess the protesters became violent, and basically shit hit the fan. And it caused this war, which you see now, to break out. And unfortunately, 500,000+ people have died in the Syrian Civil War. And it led to the biggest refugee crisis literally since perhaps the Second World War. It was really bad. And also, the Syrian conflict led to some of also the worst terror attacks in Europe's history. So, without any further ado, let's talk about the conflict for a little bit, the factions, you name it. So, what are we dealing with here? So first of all, we got the government of Bashar al-Assad, who is based in Damascus. Damascus, as all of you know, is the capital of Syria, always has been. It has never been anybody else, not even Aleppo. And then you have the Syrian opposition, so-called opposition, and their base of operations. Yes, they may have taken control over most of Aleppo, but their base of operations is in a little city called Idlib, which has been under their control since 2015. And then you got the Syrian Democratic Forces in yellow, or the Kurdish militias. You know, the People's Protection Units, aka the YPG, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, etc. And of course, they're not on the map, but somewhere they are. I don't think so anymore, because they're long gone. They're just, hiding out in the desert. The Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. You know, the infamous ISIS that beheaded people on the internet. They literally recorded themselves beheading Westerners and all sorts of people who they deemed as infidels. And, yeah, they posted it online without any sort of shame whatsoever. They didn't care. They were evil, and the whole world came crashing down on them. But here's the thing. It gets a little complicated, okay? Now, you would think that the Syrian rebels would be a unified force, right? Well, not really. You have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a.k.a. Jabhat al-Nusra, or known as the al-Nusra Front here, in English. They are the largest and most effective armed group of all of the rebels in Syria. Al-Nusra Front controls Idlib, and they also control Aleppo. Even though this map doesn't seem to confirm it, though I'm absolutely sure that they do control Aleppo right now. And in these areas, in light green here, these are controlled by the Turkish army. And their proxy/mercenary army, the Syrian National Army. Not to be confused, of course, with the Syrian Arab Army. Now, in 2012, there was this group known as the Free Syrian Army, and they were made of, all sorts of people, from all walks of life. Originally, the Free Syrian Army, I guess, was, a democratic, fighting force or something. They were rising up against what they believed to be a tyrannical regime, which had ruled them for far too long, since the 1970s. And then, I don't know what happened. A couple years after they were created, literally at the peak of the war itself, the so-called Free Syrian Army collapsed. It collapsed. And it led to the entire Syrian opposition being dominated by mostly Islamic fundamentalist groups like Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, as I said also earlier, al-Nusra Front, Noordin al-Zinki, Jabhat al-Shamia, you name it. Islamist groups became the majority of the fighting force for the Syrian opposition forces. Now, even though the opposition still proclaims itself politically to be democratic, the actual groups fighting on the ground for the opposition are not democratic. They are all Islamic fundamentalists. And as you can imagine, they don't like Christians very much. They view them as worshippers of the cross. They view Shia Muslims as dirty kuffar. And, I mean, yeah, they're not very nice people. The Syrian government is backed mainly by Russia and also Iran. And also the Hezbollah in Lebanon and also Iraq. Mainly the popular mobilization units or the Hashd al-Shaabi. So yeah, that's who backs the Syrian government. And as for the rebels, they are backed mainly by Turkey and Qatar. That's who backs the Syrian rebels mostly. Now these guys, the Syrian Democratic Forces, are actually backed by Russia, the United States, and I guess maybe the European Union and NATO. And also maybe just a little bit the Syrian government itself, even though they proclaim the SDF to be, obviously, I don't know, like a rebel group or something in their own right, because they control land that is, well, recognized as part of Syria. But the thing is that the SDF, when compared to the other rebel groups within Syria itself, actually has okay, like, mixed bag relations with Assad, even though there were a lot of instances, though, where the SDF and the SDA did clash. And for the most part, SDF came out on top. But I digress. Yeah, it's a little confusing. Now, for those who also don't remember, during, like, the opening phase of the war, like, the prime of the whole Syrian opposition, like, Islamist groups, ISIS, which I talked about earlier, used to actually be part of the Syrian opposition. They were literally allies with al-Nusra Front, with Jaish al-Islam, with Ahrar al-Sham, Zinki, all of those groups. But then what happened was, after they took over El Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor from the government, what happened was disagreements started to build up between al-Nusra Front and ISIS. You see, as you guys all know by now, ISIS came from Iraq. And in early 2014, they took the city of Fallujah, literally almost without a fight from the government, like under Maliki. That guy, by the way, is a clown, and most Iraqis hate him. And then what happened was that the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, announced in an audio recording that his group posted to the internet that, hey guys, the al-Nusra Front is merging with us, the Islamic State. And we proclaim ourselves to be the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The leader of al-Nusra Front, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who, just like Baghdadi, are both, like, wanted by the U.S. government at this time, and al-Jilani, by the way, is still wanted by the U.S. I think there's like a $10 to $15 million bounty on his head. He was like, what? I didn't agree to this. Why are you announcing this just now? Why didn't you talk to me about this? And I'm loyal to Al-Qaeda. I'm not taking orders from you. Like, fuck off. And then the infighting started between them, and it led to the collapse of the Syrian opposition in northeastern Syria. They lost all their shit in Hasaka, in Deir ez-Zor, in El Raqqa, and large chunks of Aleppo governorate. and they all ended up evacuating to Idlib. And by the way, many of these fighters who were fighting for the rebels in 2013 and 12, a lot of these guys all ended up joining ISIS. They all ended up joining ISIS, and they also helped them steamroll Mosul, the second largest city in all of Iraq. And then they proclaimed their so-called caliphate over there. Their caliphate, whatever. Which is basically like this Islamic empire, and ISIS proclaimed itself to be a representative of all Muslims, which is absolute Nazi Germany bullshit. Like, nobody bought that. Nobody recognized them. Nobody gave a shit about them. And yeah, they just got steamrolled within a matter of years. And yeah, now they're basically in the dustbin of history. But something I want to point out, though, okay, was that during the peak of ISIS's prime, when they were holding territory in both Iraq and Syria, they terrorized all of Europe. Well, large chunks of Europe. They terrorized Ankara and Istanbul in Turkey. They terrorized France a lot, like Paris and Nice. They terrorized Brussels, Belgium. They terrorized Berlin in a Christmas market. They terrorized London, Manchester. They also did an attack in Barcelona, in Spain. I mean, they did all sorts of crazy shit during the mid-2010s. And coincidentally enough, it was only after the Russian intervention in Syria in 2015 where these attacks began to slow down. Well, for a while. But it wasn't until after the fall of ISIS in 2017 where they could no longer conduct these attacks efficiently. And then after that, they just completely vanished off the face of the earth. Well, for the most part. In 2019, the United States then discovered where Baghdadi was, and it turned out that he was located in al-Nusra-controlled Idlib Governorate. If this doesn't tell you who the true colors of these guys are, I don't know what else to tell you. They are not good news. They are bad news. If these guys were to somehow pull off one of the most epic offensives of all time, the war on terror would literally be dealt a massive punch in the gut. It would be a huge step backwards for international security. Because I have no doubt that if Islamists were to take over Syria, like Taliban took over Afghanistan, I have no doubt that they're going to use Syria as a base of operations to coordinate attacks against the West, which would mean terror attacks in Europe, in Russia, the ex-Soviet Union, in Turkey, and maybe America too. Like, they can plan maybe another 9/11. Though it's highly unlikely because we kind of got our shit together after 9/11 and bolstered our security, but you never know. There's a lot of radicals here too who are just waiting to snap or something. But you get the big picture. Yeah, it would not be a good thing. So, I'll just skip to the present day and just talk about what happened. So, on Thanksgiving Day, while I was out, I heard reports about a strange thing going on in western Aleppo. The al-Nusra Front launched an offensive, an unexpected large offensive, and captured all the outskirts and the suburbs of Aleppo City, and then eventually most of Aleppo City itself. And then after that, they began to retake everything that the Syrian army had taken over during their 2019-2020 offensive against them in Idlib Dawn 2. And as of this video, right now, the Syrian armed groups, al-Nusra Front and Friends, now recontrol. Basically, they have retaken everything that they lost during this offensive. Everything that you see here that is bordered by the white, all of this has now been retaken by al-Nusra Front, and now they control the entire Aleppo governorate. I mean, no, not Aleppo, Idlib governorate. My bad. And also, there has been a collapse, too, of government forces in Aleppo itself. Now, this is very inexcusable. Like, how do you not build, like, fortifications, trenches, or, I don't know, like, man a lot of places? You know that the ceasefire was never going to work. You knew that. So, why did you not prepare yourself? But, anyway, let me explain. So, in 2020, there were a couple of offensives known as Idlib Dawn 1 and 2. And it was aimed to deal the final finishing blow to the al-Nusra Front and the Syrian opposition forces in the Idlib governorate, which would almost, if not certainly, end the war in Syria at that time. But then, just right when the Syrian army was about to march on the M4 highway, which is between Sarakib and Jisr el-Shagor here, suddenly the Russians and the Turks signed this ceasefire deal. Now, just for context, the Turks are the main backers of al-Nusra Front and the Syrian armed rebels in Idlib and Aleppo, and the Russians are the main backers of the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad. Now, in retrospective, this was one of the worst deals that Vladimir Putin ever signed on paper. It was obvious that Turkey and its proxies were never going to hold their end of the bargain. It was never going to happen. And if I had to guess why all this happened now, let's be honest, it happened because Turkey was getting impatient. The reconciliation/normalization talks were going nowhere between Syria and Turkey, and Turkey was just like, all right, fuck it, let's try to get rid of Bashar again and bring this war essentially back to 2012, when the Syrian rebels, I guess, were in control of Aleppo. Well, at least most of it. They didn't completely control the city, but this would be the first time they actually ever controlled most of Aleppo. They only controlled, like, around 50 or so % of it during, like, their peak. But this is, like, the first time ever in the Syrian Civil War history where the rebels actually now control Aleppo. And this was, like, one of their biggest defeats at that time in 2016, 8 years ago. This really was. Now, as of right now, the Kurds still hold northern Aleppo city, though I don't know how credible this is. I don't know if it's still the case now. But the fact of the matter is the Syrian army dropped the ball. They lost everything that they gained over the past 8 years in Aleppo governorate and within Idlib province too. And in fact, it got so bad that they actually entered Hama for a bit. But then the Syrian army reinforcements quickly came in, and then they kicked out the al-Nusra Front fighters from Hama city. So for now, they're being pushed back. Now here's the thing, okay? This is a really humiliating defeat for Bashar al-Assad, Russia, and Iran. But keep in mind a little something that I want you guys to know and understand going forward. Unlike Ukraine, the Syrian rebels do not have an unlimited source of manpower. They don't. Unlike Zelensky in Ukraine, he can mobilize basically whoever he wants. And even though people would complain, there's nothing they can really do about it. The rebels don't have that luxury. In fact, once their guys start dropping like flies, in fact, it already has been the case, by the way, during the last couple of days, any future counteroffensive by the Syrian Arab army on Idlib governorate and on Aleppo especially has a good chance of succeeding. Now, keep in mind, though, also, the Syrian government has to first get their shit together, like, get everybody to stop the bleeding as much as they can. I mean, they got shit to do, a lot of work to do. They need to up the defenses in this area, in Hama especially. They got to kick them out of the Hama governorate first before they can start working again. And then after that, then we can start talking about a counteroffensive. Because for now, it seems as if the rebel offensive on the Syrian government is beginning to run out of steam just a little bit, but I'm not so certain about that. But we'll see. Now, if Hama were to fall to the Islamist rebels, then Bashar al-Assad's in big trouble, which would then lead to Homs being in danger soon. And if Homs falls, then GG, well played. Because then they'll just have a direct road to Damascus, which is the capital of Syria. Now, I've heard some reports that the Syrian rebels have also started attacking from Damascus, like the area, where the U.S. occupies, like, a small chunk of it, like in the south, but we have no credible confirmation of that so far. And the SDF has also begun a mass mobilization, too, across their areas of control. So that's something to keep in mind. There's also unconfirmed reports that they have taken all of, like, the remaining, like, areas of the eastern side of the Euphrates River under their control. And there's even some reports that they're even trying to fight the Syrian army for control of Deir ez-Zor. But there's no confirmation of that. And it might be fake news just to, like skyrocket more like a panic. And there was even news of a supposed attempted coup in Damascus, but it was fake news. So yeah, a lot of shit has happened in the last couple of days or so, and to be honest, this is just the beginning of the revival of the Syrian Civil War. I don't know how long this is going to last. It's probably going to last, in my opinion, for 1 or 2 years or so at least. At most, it might last just as long as Afghanistan did, and that would be another 10 years. But it's not likely. The U.S., by the way, has proclaimed neutrality, and Iraq has made an announcement that their forces, the Popular Mobilization Forces, or the Hashd al-Shabi Popular Mobilization Units, who are a militia, like a Shia, like majority militia built up by Iran, are going to go into Syria to try to stabilize the front for the Syrian army and to also help them counter this unbelievable WoW offensive by the Syrian Islamist groups. So yeah, time will tell what will happen, but until next time, everybody, I hope all of you take care, stay safe, and peace out.